So we just want to say thank you for joining us for the live Q&A as a follow-up to the three presentations on innovative training strategies during lockdown. As a really quick intro to this series and why we're doing what we're doing at VALD, in a time where, we can feel pretty uncertain, especially across sport, and pretty powerless, we thought this was such a pertinent time to make sure we put the power back in the people's hands, and we believe that's through sharing knowledge. And that's why we've decided to create this platform and this forum and this mini-series to facilitate the sharing of knowledge, to facilitate creative discussions and enable practitioners to share ideas around best practices, experiences around high performance. So this online series that we're running, it will feature some of the world's foremost experts in performance and rehab, who will provide practitioners with informative strategies on how to build performance and resilience in athletes. And this is the first presentation, the first kind of series that we have for many weeks to come. So how this is working, so today is a great example that we're gathering some high performance experts from different industries, different backgrounds. We've asked them to deliver on-demand presentations that people can watch and consume in their own time. And we're following that up with a live panel for question and answers. Other ways that this is working as well is that we have engaged some high performance experts from other industries, and they're going to be delivering their presentations on live webinars. All of the content, though, will be recorded and available on demand. So this website or this URL here is how a lot of people actually got to register for today's webinar. So everything will be uploaded onto this with new content delivered every week. So just a really quick introduction of who we have here today. So we've got David Watts, who's the current strength and power coach for the Melbourne Demons. Previous to this, he was at Geelong Cats, and he was also involved in Queensland Academy of Sport as a strength and conditioning coach. We've also got Simon Thomas. So he's had over 11 years of experience in rugby. He's the current head of physical performance for the 2019 Super Rugby champions, the BNZ Crusaders. And he's had previous roles with the Maori All Blacks and Tasman Rugby Union. And lastly, we've got Selwyn Griffith, who's the performance coach for the Brisbane Lions. He's been at the Lions for over 7 years, but he's seen both the medical and performance side of the business. And he's also got a background as an osteopath. So without further ado, we can probably just jump straight into some of the questions. So for all of you guys, how have you both found the new normal personally and professionally? And maybe we'll go to Selwyn first.
Yeah, thanks, Erin, and pleasure to jump on with Watsy and Simon. It's been interesting, I think, for me personally, with the transition from, I guess, the AFL shutting down. It more so was around how am I going to provide for my family and take care of my family, and what does that look like for us. So personally, it was probably one of the more challenging times, whereas professionally, I've seen it as a great opportunity for our players and our organisation to continue to drive our internal culture. And fortunately enough, I think over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been able to develop a real ownership from our players around our program. So this is a fantastic opportunity for them to demonstrate their understanding of what's necessary of them when people aren't watching them and when they don't have the eyes on them. So from that perspective, I'm excited with what's possible for our playing group. And for me, it's been a case of professionally just stepping out of my comfort zone and challenging myself in other areas that you may not usually get the time to do that with the day-to-day training sessions and face-to-face field and gym sessions. So trying to work on areas of my growth and continue to take my career forward, so that once the AFL does start up, I can make sure that my commitment to the organisation and moving forward is stronger than ever.
And Watsy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'll definitely echo Selwyn's personal sentiments there around the financial side of things. Obviously, that was it's a big thing that initially sort of rocks you a bit. I'm being fortunate to be at a club that's doing really well in that standpoint, but it's still something that's in the back of your mind. Professionally, absolutely, it's been an awesome chance to just dig into some other things, things that I wouldn't normally have the chance to do. And I reckon I've been on 1 to 2 Zoom calls every day since this thing kind of started. So personally, I'm a little bit zoomed out, but a lot of really good chats with people, and feel like I'm learning a lot. And then with the club and the players, it's a delicate balance between being in contact with them enough to ensure that we're getting some really good outcomes, but also not sort of pushing the envelope at a time when guys probably aren't mentally in the best place. So like from just giving them enough personal space, but also making sure that they're getting the job done is just something that we're working on. I think it's a real individual person, individual player basis to know how much to go there. From what I can tell in discussions, I think players have now started to thrive in this third week. As a generality, I'm sure there's ones who are doing really well and others that aren't doing as well. But it sounds like they're starting to get into the new normal.
And Simon, lastly, as a comparison from AFL to rugby, how are you finding the change?
Yeah, I think on the personal side, sort of the new normal initially for us, within the first week or the first week and a half, the parameters changed pretty much every 24 hours. So it was pretty busy. You'd roll out a plan, have all your communications out, and then that was outdated the next morning, and you had to pull it all together as things changed. So it certainly made the first few days really busy trying to organise all the different moving parts. Whereas obviously that's now settled into a rhythm, and there's less sort of the rush and more thinking ahead and planning ahead. So the time around homes is great. My dogs think it's Christmas every day. We're lucky to live next to a forest and have a beach around the corner as well, so we can get out and run and bike and take them out there too, which I guess it helps to get that blend right, where working from home very easily blends into full-time work. Work becomes full-time at home, and then you forget about the home time. So it's getting that sort of balance and challenge right. And I think it's also good. It's a good challenge because we live day by day by a pre-planned schedule. So it's putting structures in place at home to try and have some sort of schedule to follow during the day, just to allocate time to things. The crossover on the personal and professional side is, I guess, what the other two lads have mentioned as well, is on the business side of things. We know that when we do get back together as a group again, that there'll be some incredible staff that have been with us for a long time that are crucial to what we do every day, that won't be there through no fault of their own. So that's the crossover, and that's the real heartbreaking part at the moment, going through that process. And the professional side, when we come through that, is how we become really lean and efficient, and do those people proud with how we get about our work and share the roles and responsibilities that they've left for us to take on, and how we lean that up so we don't just burn ourselves out trying to do a 10-man job as one person. So there's a little bit of a snapshot back to the early days when you're in a small union on your own and you've got no help and you're doing a little bit of everything. So thankfully I did a bit of learning in that space early on that I can draw back on, and we'll still have some other good people around us that'll we'll all work together and move forward.
I suppose you have to really consider what's important for your team moving forward and what processes need to stay in place and which ones might need to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard. You feel like you built something over a few years, and that all parts of it come crumbling down or fall away. But it does make you look at what's essential. Even like at the moment, there's so many places that you might have thought were important that aren't open, and we're surviving without them and getting on. So you just got to find a way to strip things back to the essentials and what we really need. And it'll take a mindset shift from everybody. There'll be less stuff and less people, but we'll get the big rocks in place first and go from there.
Great, thank you guys. So what was your process to review the best possible plan for each of your groups from a general point, so engagement and motivation with your players, to specifics, so how you're focusing on adapting them physically to where they need to be? Watsy, let's start with you.
Yep. General engagement stuff. Each week the players have had a little sort of project to do, and they've had their groups kind of mixed from that sense. So initially it was a lot of seniors with a lot of juniors. Then this week it was positional groups. So they're kind of pushing people around a little bit. And they're simple little projects like come up with like a group TikTok for a bit of fun. The first week we had like a little bit of a, find someone who's been through some really challenging times, do a bit of history and review on why they went through challenging times, and then what can we learn from it in our current situation. So they're trying to engage with our players from that standpoint. Like I said before in my previous answer, there is balance there of, not over engaging or over connecting, as it were. I think that's something that probably not everyone's clued into at the moment. Like I hear a lot of people saying, stay connected, stay connected, stay connected. But I guarantee you there's half of our players who are just sick of their phone right now and probably want to throw it against the wall because there's just constant communication. So I think there is a genuine balance there that we need to find. From the physical side of things, our process was really like largely equipment driven from a strength and conditioning point of view. Like, as in, we just needed to know what the players actually had available to them to make sure that the programming that was going out to them was effective stuff for this time off. And we probably saw it as a time to go into a little bit more of a general prep phase and put some more work into them, knowing that we'll get a couple of weeks to get them back into shape and do some more specific prep when the boys return to training. We are mindful that that's a constantly changing target though. So at the moment they're doing a reasonable volume that would be similar to sort of back end of pre-season. Like, it's not the ridiculous numbers, but they're doing a decent amount of work. And so yeah, like that's probably where we're at the moment.
Selwyn, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think some good points raised by Watsy in regards to more so the physical. So, for us, it was kind of going into a little bit more of an off-season program in regards to the conditioning volume and how we structured our strength and power program. So similar to in Watsy's presentation, you need to be able to adapt to what the guys have available, whether that's barbells, dumbbells, body weight, possibly blood flow restriction training, and how can we utilize each of those components to at least administer a stimulus that we feel will maintain the guys' strength and power capacity or lean tissue mass, and where possible for certain guys, if we know that they have the equipment available, how can we actually use this period to train a quality that we may not usually get to train at this period in time because they've just gone through a 12-week pre-season, of general prep and into the in-season program. So we don't want to step back too far, but can we find that middle ground in really individualizing on developing someone's physical capacity so that when we do come back, if there was a component that was maybe a limiting factor in their ability to perform in their role for the team, can we actually use this time to maximize it? So that component was really important for how we program for the guys. The generally engagement for us in the AFL, we're stood down from our role. So there's a certain number of staff who are still engaged in their role at the club, and for that it's our high performance manager Damien Austin, our head of medical, Peter Blanche, and then there's the head of welfare, the head coach, and the GM. So from an engagement perspective, it's also finding that balance between if they're giving them things to stay engaged with, then other staff need to understand that maybe that's not their current role to try and do. So while reaching out and trying to stay connected can be valuable, there's also a component of understanding what your role is within the organisation. So if you're going out and trying to do or go over and above to try and engage with athletes, there may already be stuff happening behind closed doors or preparing of programs for that from the other guys that are actually still technically employed by the organisation. So there's that happy balance as well. And we've got really good communication from Damien and Blanche and what they're doing, but at the same time, the messaging needs to probably make sure that it's coming from them rather than just me, because they're the ones that will be feeding the information back to our CEO and back to the rest of the people that are still employed at the club. So it's also finding that balance of, usually in day to day, you'd be involved in every single decision that's being made on the ground at that time, but currently there's going to be a lag in some of that information, and that's it's not to say that you're not an important component of it. It's just to say that there's only a certain amount of people that can currently be making those decisions and rolling it out. So understanding how you play within that as well is really pivotal.
I suppose, Simon, from your perspective, being a high performance manager, would you agree with what Selwyn's saying, or have you at the Crusaders organised your team a little bit differently where more people are still involved with the athletes?
Yeah, I think it's a great overview of how things sort of operate on the organisational side of things at the moment. And when we want to get messaging out or drive certain components, it is about not having too many voices and trying to simplify it and just make it really clear and concise. I think from the player engagement side of things, we sort of understand that there's a pretty long period of where we need these guys to be working towards. It's a while away. So even for staff and players as well, it is a chance to time out and time away and do less and still be effective. And of course, you don't want to be asking a whole lot of staff when there is that uncertainty around what roles in the financial side might look like for people too. So you do strip it right back and just allow people time to process what's going on. People have all of a sudden got a lot more time at home with family and with other commitments and things going on. That's new to them as a challenge, whether they're staff members or players. They often spend a lot of time away from home, so they're paying it all back now, and they're making the most of it. So we allow people time and space, I think, to do that. And from our player perspective, in terms of the engagement side of things, we've made I guess it's a deliberate effort of not trying to do too much and throw too much at them early unless it's critical information for how to do the right thing in the community and what they need just to tick over on the simple parts of their training. We want them scratching at the door and to come back and be looking forward to seeing each other again. Wanting them trying to kick the door down basically, so that they're not getting worn out and sick of each other before they actually all get in the same room together. So there's a lot of individual personalities. Some people really draw that energy off others and will seek it out. But even though we're in a team sport, we've got players and staff who get worn out being constantly surrounded by people and have been bombarded by communication. So the time out for them is really important as well. And our season will be different. Super Rugby, normally we're playing games from February to June or July, whereas it's only really going to be a 10-week, potentially 12-week competition when we come back. So it's going to be more of a sprint. We can lay some really good foundations towards that, and then potentially a bit of a less is more approach, knowing that our New Zealand Derby games are pretty physical too, and all the teams will be gearing up to really go at it when they get a chance to play. So that's when we need the most energy as a group, and we want that real engagement of players when they finally do get back together. They're hungry for it now, so we're we're 3-4 weeks in, some are 5 weeks in, depending on whether we landed home from Brisbane or not and went straight into a quarantine period before the national lockdown. So we're starting to do some things, just making some of the connections online optional, and the hunger for it and the engagement, and that is pretty promising. It tells us that very soon we can start to do some things with everybody, because they're gearing up to be back together again as a group. And the physical side really sort of mirrors that. I think we've all seen it in a very similar way, that you can go back to an off-season process, and then we're going to get some form of pre-season process to bridge the gap between what you can and can't do individually, and then you have to play games. So it's going to take some very smart planning and coordinating around what the physical side looks like within the requirements when we do get together in small groups or as a team. But at this stage, it's really important. It never escapes me how fortunate I am with the players that we have. They're incredible at doing their off-season work and turning up in a really good physical space. So we're very lucky with that. We know that they'll nail that. They just won't have all of the tools that they would normally have. So they've got to get their heads around that and find other ways to get to where they want to go. But it's a great growth experience for them as well.
Simon, you guys at the Crusaders previously, I think on one of the podcasts I've listened to, you have followed a journey of other teams previously, or journeys of maybe things that have happened historically to almost build a story. Is that correct? And have you done something similar to that with this component of adversity?
Yeah, we do. We always we'll have a theme. We'll have a story and a narrative that we tie our campaign to. That's a real driver of our engagement, and how we go about that process and live out our version of that story. And like I say, fortunately this year, what we've chosen and how we've framed it up, it still fits. So we can use components of that. I can't share it yet, but so that's at least it's something that's got a lot of flexibility in it that allows us to still utilise it and revisit it and reinvent it and reignite it when we get back together as a group. So we haven't touched on it a whole lot yet, but as we get closer to getting back together, we'll start to feed some of that narrative in and just re-engage the players with the story and get that deep feeling back before we get back on that journey. So. Yeah, so there's something there. That's something that we do. It's a big part of what we do and how we operate. We saturate it throughout every part of what we do. The adversity side of it, sort of unluckily but luckily, being from Christchurch, we've had our share of it in the past with the earthquakes and then with the shooting last year as well. So we've got a group who have had experience and learnt how to pull together with each other in a community and support each other when something sort of falls over and falls away and goes wrong. So been able to I guess snap into a process pretty quickly because it's something we've done before in a way. It's obviously a different situation now, but we've certainly faced some things that have been potential derailers within our seasons before too.
Probably flows on well next to Aaron's next question around which type of athletes benefit from this experience, because I think all of us have probably dealt with the types of athletes that doesn't matter how good a program you put in front of them, their ability to kind of do it when eyes aren't on them are never going to be to the level you would like. But then you have those other athletes that have that internal drive, that constant motivation to want to improve and get better. And, some people have that intrinsic motivation naturally. Others it's by experience, like what you're talking about, Simon. If you've had some adversity within your life or within your culture or environment around you, then tapping into that and using it as a motivator can be really powerful. And I think those are the type of athletes that will benefit from this experience, but also, like what both of you have touched on, kind of having that balance of prescribing but not dictating, and giving them a choice, but giving them options as well, because some guys who have been in the AFL ranks for 10 to 12 years are just they get bored by just monotonous running or monotonous gym. So throwing something different at them, like a CrossFit style gym workout or a F45 style cross training component, mixed Ironman type challenges and those sorts of things. Like, this is the time that all of a sudden those things that you wouldn't usually engage them with in this period, you can actually do and allow them to have a bit of fun with it. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything else to add around those types of athletes, but I think, yeah, we're fortunate at the Lions to have a significant portion of them. But it's probably also been bred out of the fact we've been so poor for a long period of time and not won games. So now that we've tasted a bit of success in the last 12 months, that drive is even more intrinsic from our group to kind of prove people wrong.
Yeah, I'd just agree wholeheartedly with Selwyn's thoughts around, like there's those intrinsically driven athletes who are going to come back in really good nick and potentially the best shape of their lives because they've had nothing but the ability to train for however long. And then we'll absolutely get some guys who'll come back in shocking shape. I would hesitate to say that it'll be the usual suspects though, because I think potentially, this is really contextually driven and there's so many factors that will go into how well a certain player might get into a routine in his own individual situation. Like someone might actually have like a really good setup all of a sudden, and someone who's typically not a great trainer, doesn't have anything else to do, starts to actually find a bit of a groove. And, I think I might have a few people surprise me when I come back to work. But, I think classically this would be that standard sort of players returning from off-season, the ones who you expect to do well because they're intrinsically driven will come back and ripping nick, and you'll have the usual suspects who might not. But there's a lot more going on around this one, so potentially with a few surprises.
I think all athletes got the opportunity to benefit from this by seeing themselves as more than just athletes as well. So there's so many other parts that they can engage with that can refresh them, and then they can really apply themselves to their work when they come back, when they come to training, and when they come back together as a group, because they've got a bit more balance. And it's that snapshot of what it looks like to actually be retired or be injured and have it all taken away, and then get that the gratitude for being able to actually do it when it comes around again. So, and even at the moment, being able to do it in your own time. So it is an interesting one. It is. I think everybody can be intrinsically driven. It's just finding that driver and that why and what it might be. So for some, it's just being able to play and enjoy and have fun, and so it's trying to find ways to do that and make things a bit more fun and enjoyable and engaging. And say for others, they're just a metronome and they'll just get on with their work and get it done regardless. So the motivation and the driven side is really interesting. I've been looking at a bit of work in that and reading Can't Hurt Me, Dave Goggins' book, he's a pretty tough man, and he talks about motivation being very short-lived and motivation being crap, but being driven is a whole lot different. And so you can be motivated by listening to a motivational speech or reading his book or seeing something on YouTube, and you go out for a run because you're motivated, and then the wind blows in your face and it's raining and hailing, and if you're driven, you keep going, and if you were only motivated, you turn around and sit down because it's more comfortable. So it's just finding those real drivers and what gets people out. So there aren't eyes on them at the moment, so doing it for themselves, which will grow everybody. When we run fitness testing and different elements as a performance group or S&C coaches, we're wanting to do that, to have the players do it for themselves to improve. But the reality is a lot of them will still see it as they're having to do it for us because it's written down on the schedule. So how do they shift to that point where they're actually doing this for themselves and not for us because we're there telling them to do it?
I mean, in your presentation, you also talked about shifting the mindset to look at this as more of an opportunity or a time to gain things. And you spoke about, the nutritional elements as well as the mindset elements. And I suppose, is there anything that you guys are doing at the Crusaders that would be educating the players right now on being able to take control of that part themselves?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate with some of the work that's done within our academy, and that we had laid some foundations before in those areas around what you can practice in terms of mindset, mindfulness, or in the nutrition space. Now they just get a chance to practice it, and they're forced to, because you can't go and pick something up and Uber Eats aren't delivering. So depending on how happy your partner or your flatmates are to do all the cooking, there's a really good opportunity for them to build that skill set. And it's something I dropped in the presentation, and something I saw recently as well around, if you're going to build one skill set and have one thing that you nail and a component that's going to benefit your training and your recovery in every part of your career, as well as life ongoing, it's the understanding of your nutrition and your ability to cook and prepare your food. So yeah, how you can fuel and how you recover, we know that underpins so much of that. So they really are trapped in a cooking class at the moment for a month, where they can experiment and they have to go and buy ingredients, and you can't just heat things up or get things dropped off. So it's been good. Some of the work, it's probably been less educational, but we've been trying to get a bit of engagement around how they can put that education into practice. So within our WhatsApp group, like it was obviously Easter, so there'll be enough chocolate eggs floating around, but there's a competition around who could produce the best poached eggs and post those up, and how well they presented those. And there were a couple of goodie fits and a couple that weren't so good. So another one was just have a crack at baking scones, and one of our coaches is driving that. So have a crack at baking some scones, put the kettle on, sit down and join us for a cup of tea and a scone on Zoom, and just have a chat with a special guest joining in. So there's so much of it that's not rugby that's really important. And I know other teams around New Zealand are doing some really good things in that space as well, and I'm sure everywhere else over in Australia and around the world. So I think we'll start to drip feed some more of the mindfulness and the mindset and the mental skills as we get closer. But at the moment, that's just more around focus and engagement and being present at home, and disconnecting from your phone and connecting with your partner or your kids or your dogs, or something as a bit of personal growth if you live by yourself. So, and then it'll become a bit more performance focused, you say, as we get closer to the light at the end of the tunnel when we get back together again.
I suppose moving on from that then, the next question is, do you think that there's any types of athletes that will struggle from this experience? Watsy, we'll go to you.
I'd say I think the overly extroverted athletes will probably be the ones who will be the most challenged by this. As in, extroverts are those who gain energy from being around people and that social aspect. And they're a dime a dozen in team sport. So I think there will be a number of those people who really rely on that social element to drive their performance that might really struggle through this, and might struggle to get energy, to get motivation, as it were. It's funny that you bring up the Goggins example, Simon, because I was actually using that very example talking to a player this morning. So it's funny how these things seem to pop up again and again. But yeah, I really think the extrovert guys who rely so much on the social aspect are the ones who will be the most challenged. I can't think. I think this is all so individually based on what's their setup at home. Have they got a partner who's really understanding of the requirements of being an AFL or rugby union professional athlete, and are they going to facilitate them getting their training done, or are they potentially going to limit them getting their training done, like little things, stepping away to give them space to go out and the sessions we're giving the guys will probably take them 3 hours if it's get in the car, find an oval, get warmed up, get the session done, come back, and then they've probably got to have some lunch, and then they've got a lifting session to do. So if the people that they're actually living with at this time aren't understanding of just how much work these guys still have to do, then that could be a real limiter, and nothing to do with personality styles, but just, is their setup at home going to facilitate them getting the work done? So, it's really hard to tell who is and isn't going to thrive. At the moment, the best we can do is just support when people reach out for support, and just keep letting them know that we're here to help in any way that we can. But at the moment, I couldn't say for certain who, but those are my best guesses.
Have you found that there's been a shift in mindset and I suppose attitude as the weeks have gone on and people are kind of getting used to this new normal?
I definitely think that the conversations that I've had with players this week, the overall tone has been a lot better. As in, they've started to find a rhythm and a new normal, as the earlier question alluded to. Like after a couple of weeks of this, and now know that this is what it's going to be, and they've got a daily routine set up. I think it's been a lot better. Initially, with just as much not knowing is probably the hardest thing. Like, players love that sense of control. It's like, at this time, I need to do this and I need to perform in this way. Like, they're just so used to having every minute of their day planned out, that you take all that control away from them, and that's going to really rock them. So now, after about 3 weeks, I feel like they're starting to get into a bit more of a rhythm and find it. But like the example I gave before, there was, a player who's just going, "Oh, look, I'm just not feeling the motivation." And, I pivoted to David Goggins and Jocko Willing talking about discipline rather than motivation. And, you just got to do what you can to keep players moving along.
Selwyn, how have you found the comparison at the Lions?
Yeah, I think what you made is a great example there. I agree on some of these points around, the finding what drives them, and hopefully with some of the goal setting components that we work with some of our guys on, they understand what it is that drives them. And as Simon touched on before, it may also be the fact that now they're starting to view themselves as more than just an athlete. So we've got guys who have gone home and gone back to their job at Bunnings, and they're doing that part-time, or they've, might be renovating. A couple of the guys are renovating their houses here in Brisbane, and so next minute it's like, oh, well, I'll go help him dig a hole and actually do some labouring for work and those sorts of components. So guys are probably starting to get a bit uncomfortable in the whole scenario, which in the initial few weeks for guys who say are out of contract at the end of this year, I think the questions were actually, well, hang on, am I actually going to have enough time to prove my worth and play for my career, or is my career done? So you have those guys as well who will struggle in that initial period of questioning whether or not they're going to get the opportunity to continue their career and possibly, demonstrate their value, whether it's to our organisation or to other organisations, if they've got the chance to extend their career. So I think that's the interesting concept, and everyone deals with adversity differently. So how you respond to this scenario and the changes that have been enforced is going to be different in every individual. We, as an organisation, have previously tried to engage our leadership group and our athletes to follow up guys regarding maybe their attention to detail or their professionalism. So when it comes to this component, if you are hearing whispers of certain guys struggling, then we'll, as staff, tend to take a backward step and maybe look to one of their mentors within the playing group or one of their best mates, because our guys are all, got 47 mates, and so driving the standard of your mate may be different from me as a staff member trying to drive that standard for someone who's struggling. So it's also making sure that they're just looking out for each other, and that dialogue doesn't need to come through us as staff. That's more so them looking out for each other in a time where we are uncertain and there is a lot of questions that we don't have the answers for at the moment.
Simon, would you be the same? You spoke before about the community within your club. Would you have players reaching out to each other as well to offer support, or how have you recognised the athletes that are struggling during this experience?
Yeah, it's all the above. I think the reality is to I guess at risk of repeating myself from the answer of the question before, is they'll all struggle from this at some point in some way. So just to re-emphasise some really good points there. I mean, we're aware of the players who they play a team sport because they love that immersion and a group energy, and so they'll really be missing that. And if that's what really drives them to keep getting better and keep doing what they're doing, then they'll be struggling without having that around them. And then, as Selwyn sort of mentioned as well, you got to be wary of the quiet ones as well as the loud ones, because they may be the ones that are struggling and don't necessarily reach out and ask for help. They might be the quiet voice that just tries to box on and find their own way through it. So that's how we open up some good trusted channels where players can be really can be vulnerable or be really open around what they might be struggling with. And I say that the home life scenario is really important for we do as their time away from whatever the responsibilities or the pressures are at home, or what helps them engage with their training and what they're doing with us every day. So to try to balance that in with being at home and figure a way around it. If the expectations have risen because now it's home time or it's payback time for the last 5 to 10 years of your career where you've been on the road or away at training and you haven't been around to help, it can be quite difficult too. So I think there's we've only got one, perhaps two players that are actually on their own. So I think that's one where it sort of can become a struggle really, because if they're not reaching out and staying connected and engaged in other ways, it's really easy for them to struggle and not really reach out and get some help with anything that they are finding difficult.
So what we'll do now, guys, thanks for that. Thanks for answering all these questions. What we'll do is we'll go to our listeners and answer or take some of the questions from them. We've had Miles, I don't know if you can see that in the Q&A box on your screens there, but Miles Usher, he wants our view on what a good training load in terms of running meters per week, both in and off season. So he's read a lot on Tim Gabbett's work in that he promotes a solid high chronic load that is built up progressively. For example, if a player is running 8,000 meters in a game, is there a percentage of this volume that should be run during training in the week? Sal, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, well, Tim's work's been well documented, and the constant debate online around ACWR and everything else has been well documented as well. But I think that the major thing is just understanding where your players have been and where they've got to go. So all of our organisations will have a good understanding of what a week looks like if we're back playing. What we won't have a great handle on is how much they've necessarily done, because we don't have necessarily objective markers on GPS or those sorts of things while they're in this period. Some guys might be tracking session RPE and getting then an estimate over how much work they've done over this block. So that may give you a good, if guys have been diligent, give you a good guideline of where they'll probably come back at from a chronic load perspective. And then I think from there, you just have to try and understand your playing group. So some playing groups that are resilient and robust are going to be able to deal with a higher volume of percentage work in the first couple of weeks back than other groups. And it's all going to be very much individualized, as well as, the volumes that Watsy and I are going to experience with our AFL guys are going to probably be higher than maybe some of Simon's in certain components. So it'll be different sport to sport. I'm not sure I could put a percentage on the volume. What'll it be? It'll be a case of we know where we need to get guys to. If, say, for example, we have a 4-week period where we can train as a team before we play our first game, so we'll know where we need to get the group to as an average by that game. So it's how quickly can we build them up to that volume across the 4 weeks. And the first week, once you introduce that load, you're probably not going to get too many injuries. It'll be the subsequent weeks. If you go too hard in week 1, then things might break in week 2, 3, or 4. So it's how you progress that slow burn over the kind of if we use 4 weeks as a build-in period, and build them up to what they're going to have to withstand in a game for their game readiness. I don't know if you have anything more to add to that. What's he on the AFL front, mate?
No, I wouldn't have too much more to throw on top. Honestly, this question you could easily spend an hour going back and forth on, and going into, high-speed running. Is it relative? Is it absolute volumes? Do we believe in the ratio, or do we just believe in chronic load overall? And, so it is a very big question. Just to give some simple black and white answers, I mean, pre-season we'd be looking anywhere from around about 32 all the way up to 45 Ks a week. Potentially, pre-season obviously is periodized like anything else. In season, 25 to 35 Ks a week, depending on who you are and what kind of running demands of your game. As for, what they get during the week, no, we've never really used a percentage of game load. I think it's often quite just reflective of maybe where the player's at week to week, where the playing group's at. Like, do we feel like they need a little bit more? So honestly, the high performance teams that I've been involved with have taken more an augmented approach, where you're aware of the numbers, you're aware of the data, but it still comes down to a clinical practitioner's decision. And that's largely driven by, in collaboration with the coaching staff as well, not to mention, what the players feel like doing. The one last thing that I would add to sort of the black and white sort of numbers that I gave at the front there is that, we are going to be playing with much smaller quarters. So it means that the demands of the game, I think, will change pretty drastically. And we saw that in round 1 from numbers that we might usually be used to. So I think it will change significantly, and I think it will be a less demanding game overall. But we're also talking about potentially having, 4 or 5 day turnarounds if we're really trying to squeeze games in. So there's a lot of challenges for the, what do you do on a main training day in between games on a 4 and 5 day turnaround, and then especially when you might be having, 3 games in, I think it was something silly like 3 games in 15, 18 days. I don't know, there's all kind of things that could happen. I think all we can do now is make sure that they've got a good chronic load and prepare them as well as we can when they return.
Simon, do you have anything different to add from the voice?
I think it's a really good point at the end there around what we're actually preparing for, and whether that looks different to what we're usually preparing for. We need to take that into account. From a rugby perspective, especially a Super Rugby in New Zealand perspective, and we're the by far the lowest running of any of the groups in this discussion in terms of rugby versus the running that happens in an AFL. But you prepare through your pre-season and Super Rugby for a high running demand game in the first part of the season, because the ball's alive, the ball's in play a lot, and it's moving. And as we move towards a New Zealand winter, the game changes and tightens up a bit, and it becomes less running demand, and the contact demand and winning the arm wrestle in the winter conditions becomes more prevalent. So, and that's what we'll be working towards if we manage to kick off in a June or a July, for example. So it's going to be when we would normally shift our conditioning focus, it'll fit with that in terms of the running versus the other elements within the game too. So I guess to get back around the question is, it's around how long we have to work with, and I guess we don't know exactly, but we know that we've got time to pull things back initially and figure out what that end point might be and progressively build up to it. I mean, do we have time just to step load that towards a certain process, or are we going to wave up and wave back down and then try and reach another peak, or do we fit a rest week or a bit of an unloading week in there somewhere so that we can actually adapt to the loads that we're giving them for training at the moment, and type of running as well. So that's one thing to consider is, I guess, the type of running that we're giving them in their conditioning sessions. can we make it close to what they'd normally be doing in training? And it's not going to have those same multi-directional elements and the conditioning game and skill elements that we'd normally get in that running too. So to go exact numbers for exact numbers we'd get through, you know, an 80-minute match of running and rugby in a pretty short space of time if we're just doing it in running blocks with nothing else worked in. So really got to have that combination. And then I guess the other side for us to consider is what we'd normally do in a training week on the surface that we have compared to what our players are doing at the moment in various conditions at whatever local park is closest to their house. It might be a really soft surface if it rains. It might be incredibly hard surface because there's no watering going on. You know, the groundsman can't mow at the moment, so the grass might be a hell of a lot longer. So there's those individual conversations around what some of the challenges of that surface are that our players are training on, leads us to adapt a little bit from just our normal model where we would work off a game average per position for that individual, or what a normal Tuesday or a Monday training week might look like. So some of those adjustments become really important for us.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you made there, Simon, around 80 minutes worth of running versus 80 minutes worth of rugby. You're completely contrasting, and I reckon it's almost the more important question is how much skill volume can you do, how early once you get the guys back, because if you've been prescribing running sessions, let's say guys haven't had someone to kick a football with, like an AFL ball, so they've been doing skills by themselves, and kicking the footy to yourself on an oval isn't overly resourceful, and you're definitely not going to get the same multi-directional decision making, you know, stimuluses that you are going to get from performing a 60-minute skill session with your team. So that's I think you can do linear based running to build volume pretty comfortably when we get these guys back. It's how much skill work can we expose them to if we're having to prepare them, like what you said, for 3 games in 18 days, because that's going to be the component that's going to prepare them for those 3 games. It's not going to be, oh yeah, they've done 25 Ks of linear based running with good high speed volume and good sprint exposure. It's going to be, all right, well, they've actually done components of tackling, wrestling, grappling, change of direction, small-sided games, and you've actually exposed them to the demands of the game, which in this current environment, that's probably the one restriction that you have, because in Queensland at the moment, they can run in 2s, but doing lane kicking or leading patterns will only expose them to so much, and how much of that equates to what they'd get within a main training session or a pre-season training session if you're doing 18v18. So that's, I think, going to be the interesting component, because the more you can expose you guys to skills and skill volume in a quicker component, I think the more prepared they'll actually be for the games, whether they are one every 5 days or, like what you spoke about, Watsy, because that is going to be what our guys need to do. And we're going to have to get creative about then when you drop strength work in, because you're not going to have the luxury of 7-day turnarounds and 2 strength cycles a week. Or if you're playing 3 games in 16 days, you may get 1 or 2 opportunities to expose them to some form of strength. So what does that look like? And so these are the other components that are going to be really interesting as well.
We've had 2 questions come in. One's anonymous and one's from Pierre, and they kind of touch on the points that you guys are talking about, is knowing the gaps that the players might have from the at-home training, what they have and haven't been able to do. How are you going to address those? And I suppose, what are the biggest challenges that are going to come with a increased congestion period with game fixtures? So I suppose if you want to, I know they're 2 separate questions ideally, but they're very interrelated into how you're addressing those gaps and what opportunity you have to execute on those. So from what Selwyn was touching on, Simon, do you have anything different to say?
Yeah, I think so. They're good questions, and they do tie in to the last question as well, because I think that the position that we're in at the moment is the one part that we can be really creative with and get as much as we possibly need to, is the running side of things. So it's really important, however we work our way towards that end point when we get back together as a group, is that our players need to be able to handle what the running load's going to be of that week one when they do come in, so that we don't have to work on building our running with that short period that we might have to get towards games. It has to be focused on the areas that we can't do in ones or in twos or in threes. So for us, that's the contact elements and the skill elements and some of those sorts of things. So that is going to be really critical. So we're working very closely with, obviously with our national body and with our government around what that looks like. There'll be pressure to get games up and running early from various places, because the business needs games to survive and broadcast needs games to survive. So it's going to be how we bridge that gap and get the safest possible or available process to have a pre-season period, and that pre-season period training as a team, they're the parts we have to focus on. So similar to coming out of an off season, the expectation for your players is to turn up fit so that you don't have to waste your pre-season working on fitness. You use your pre-season working on putting the elements of your game together and bridging the gap of the things that you can't do on your own.
Watsy, do you have anything different?
Yeah, I think there's another question that probably alludes to where I might go with this coming up, but I think one of the things will be understanding what the actual gaps are. So, like Selwyn did a really good presentation on profiling the other day. Like, I know personally when we get back into training, and, like everyone will be going through some kind of hamstring assessment pretty quickly, understand, who has and hasn't been doing the work through objective measures, and then subjective as well. Like, I'm pretty keen to just grab a whiteboard, as each player comes through, just, okay, seriously, what have you been doing? Be honest with me, because then, we've only got a 4-week period here. If I all of a sudden dump a whole bunch of strength on you at the same time as we're dumping a whole lot of extra football skill specific demands on you, then, we're going to hurt people that way. So it'll have to be quite, for me, it'll have to be quite bespoke for each individual about, well, what is the gap that they have missed? Like some of the guys who've been doing bodyweight programs, they might have actually been doing their Nordics twice a week and doing them really, really well. And they'll come back with a really good hamstring profile, but maybe they don't have the same kind of, just global lower body strength that you would typically see with the guys that you would get from trap bar, barbell work. So it'll be about identifying what is the actual gap for each player. And the main thing that, someone to spend a bit of time on there is like that 4 weeks really should be pretty aggressively driven towards making sure they're ready to play football again, because they've done plenty of general prep over this period. So it'll be the balance of filling those gaps within the context of a specific prep period.
You kind of touched on one of the other questions there. You're talking about objective and subjective kind of measures for when the guys do start coming back. Would you have any, for all of you, would you have any kind of standardized screening tests that you'll be doing once the guys do come back into training? Watsy, do you want to start?
Yep, sure. We'll most likely do, like at an appropriate time in the first week, we'll do a Nord board. We'll do a jump test to assess where they're at there. We'll do some groin assessment, which is just squeeze in different positions. I'll probably kind of loosely do some testing within training, as it were. Just simple things like just allowing guys to build up to a heavy in certain lifts, just so I understand where their strength is approximately at, and put some, if I can get my materials in place, I'll put some velocity assessment on that to get an estimate of where they're potentially at. So for us, it'd probably be something through the hammies, something through the groins, a jump test, and then an overall assessment of their strength levels and where they're at.
From a subjective point of view, would it be more kind of bespoke, or would there be anything standardized there?
No, like I'm pretty big believer in just having a conversation with people from that standpoint. Like honestly, the conversation will be, okay, seriously, how much have you lifted over this period? How much of the change of direction work were you doing of the running component? How much acceleration have you done? When was the last time you felt like you actually ran at 90% or above? And like I'll be pretty upfront in those sort of conversations of going, just give me an honest answer, because having someone give us information that's untrue means we're not going to put the right program in place. It'll be about going, look, you're not in trouble. We just want to make sure that we get this right for you and make sure you're prepared for the season. So, like those would be the big ones for me, is like, when did you run fast last? And then, do you feel like you've consistently done that over a period of time? How much have you lifted? How regularly have you lifted? And then the change of direction and acceleration component of their running as well.
Simon, do you have anything different from what Watsy was saying in terms of objective measures?
I think with the objective measures, we'll probably follow a similar process we do in our pre-season off our normal off-season. So we'll take, if we get it might be a 2-week process, it might be a 3-week process, training together as a group before games start, that we'll take our time to get through that, let's say, and get the subjective conversations. And I think some of our objective markers we'll look to put in a little bit later. So we'll look to try and find our rhythm in that first week, and then somewhere in week 2 or week 3, I'm happy to, I guess, give or take a little bit in terms of a result under a little bit of fatigue, just to make sure that we get everybody to the right space in terms of training and preparation to play before we measure, unless there's somebody coming in that we know there's something specific that we want to assess from a medical point of view early. So that'll be our process for that. Is we'll take our time before we really measure the objective markers, and they'll be somewhere within the training process rather than when we first walk in the door. And then so we've got some subjective stuff going on at the moment. The individual checkpoint for our players today is just to look themselves in the mirror and give themselves a score out of 10 with how well they've committed to their training in the first 3 weeks of this process. And it's okay for that not to be perfect, because there's been a lot going on. And if it's a low score, have a really good think about why it might be a low score and what some solutions might be, and how you can commit to this week just being better than last week as a first step. And if you need help with some of those solutions, then get on the phone and give us a call and talk those through so we can help. And then next week, there'll be a very simple running test that the players will do at the front of the week, but I've asked them they don't even have to send me the time, because they're doing it for themselves, not for me. So they need to check where they're at in terms of Bronco tests that we'd normally do in pre-season, run their time, and if they're concerned about their time for any reason, then give me a call and talk about how we can adjust. And then we'll run one where we actually get the time in the week before we assemble, so that at least we've got a good marker of where they're at, and that helps us adjust what those first 2 or 3 weeks might look like, and then what we measure when, because the games will be on us pretty quickly.
Sal, you were talking about having all your preseason benchmarks to compare to. Well, what measures of those are you going to be looking at when the boys come back into the training environment?
I think it's similar to what Simon touched on. It'll be training is testing and testing is training. So it'll be dropping it in where we can within the training program. We've been recording it all through pre-season and through the kind of transition into the in-season period. So it won't be anything indifferent for our guys. It'll just be where it fits best within the program, and we'll try and get as much of our normal, I guess, protocols done as we feel necessary. But yeah, we'll be specifically targeted to some of the ones like what he touched on in regards to hamstring profiling, hip profiling, and some form of strength and power profiling. So it may be that we don't do all the batteries of tests because the window may be too short, but it'll definitely be, we'll prioritise the components that we think are important to make sure our group's resilient enough to withstand training, because as what he touched on, we can't just go prescribing the normal strength and power program we'd like if they haven't done the residual work previously, because there'll be some soreness that will be associated to that, which may actually mean that they can't complete the skill volume or the skill work that they need to. And once we get back, skill will be king. So the importance of them performing every training session, getting through every training session on the field will be pivotal for them being prepared for the game. So if we go to start just assessing for the sake of assessment, then we may actually be doing more harm than good. So yeah, that'll be where we position ourselves. So it's just a matter of hopefully the guys understanding what needs to be done. And as Simon touched on, you know, we're fortunate at the Lions to have guys who understand what sort of shape they need to come back to. And I don't think this will be any different. It's just a matter of what they had at their exposure. If they weren't able to do any loaded strength work for a 6 to 8 week period, then, you know, there is a high chance they've lost some of that residual strength that Watsy spoke about. And so we just need to be aware of that. It's not about finger pointing or blaming. It's just about making sure that we create the best possible program for all 47 athletes.
Great. And last question that we'll have before we wind this up is probably a bit of a spanner in the works, but is there anything from this period that you think you'll implement in the future? So anything that you've seen from this opportunity, I suppose, that you want to keep around for seasons to come or the future to come?
Tricky question. I think, I think there'll be certain components of this whole experience that will make all organisations work more efficiently. You're probably going to see slightly smaller performance departments and the impact of, you know, the financial burden. So there's going to be those sorts of components. In regards to, I think the interesting thing for me is going to be when we get our guys back who have just been doing, say, bodyweight strength exercises and plyometrics. What does their profile look like? Because maybe it may demonstrate that some of the stuff that we think is important in the gym actually isn't important to maintain a physical quality, and vice versa. So there may actually be components that at the moment I don't know, because I can't, I guess, assess it against what the athletes are going through. But once we get back, maybe there'll be questions that I've been asking myself, but never, I guess, had the opportunity to maybe put it into trial, that I'll actually be able to see what that looks like. So those sorts of things, I think I'll have a better idea about once the players are actually back in front of me and we are able to assess what they've been able to do.
Watsy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything that's come up that's particularly new or novel. I think one of the things that potentially will come out of this, and Selwyn kind of spoke to it a little bit there, is that I think potentially we'll start to realise that, you know, given a good program, good direction, athletes actually can do a pretty good job of keeping themselves in shape. You know, and we might, I think potentially you're going to find out more about some novel ways of doing things in pretty ordinary circumstances when players return. Like they might, you know, have 3 or 4 little nuggets of gold about how they got their training done while they're away, and then you never actually think of it until you're put in a pretty tough situation. You have to find a way to get it done. I can't say there's anything that comes to the top of my head right now. I think it'll be more when the players return. I think we'll learn a lot.
And what about yourself, Simon?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty similar answer, really. I think there'll be there's maybe an opportunity within an off-season period where players have been going into an organised and structured training environment all year, whether it's Super Rugby or the other competitions that they go into afterwards, that maybe in that sort of 4 to 6 week off-season period that they get, normally we're an open facility and they can come in and out and complete their training at any time, whether it's actually giving them the opportunity to sign out some equipment and set up their gym at home and top it up with some of their own stuff and actually get a real break from the building, and do that in a different space so that it's really refreshing when they do come back in. I think they'll have a really good idea of what it might look like if they go camping in their off season, or they go somewhere and they have a stress around what they may or may not be able to do strength wise. They'll draw on this experience and know what they did when they only had access to a kettlebell and a band and a plate, or a home gym with not enough load to lift heavy, but what they can do with isometrics and eccentrics and pauses and some different methods and 1.5 rep methods and things that they can do, that provides that little bit of variation. So yeah, it's probably more from the athlete side of things. There's a good question that just popped in down the bottom there that the other two lads might be able to answer better than me around blood flow restriction training. It's not something that we've done, but it's probably it's a pretty good opportunity to plug some air bands.
Yeah, we've definitely used it. I've used it heavily in a rehab setting. I think you've used BFR a bit before as well, and so yeah, we've given some guys the opportunity to purchase their own if they are on a farm and don't have a huge amount of access to weights, and just use the standard principles of the 30, 15, 15, 15 kind of rep scheme, or some AMRAP stuff with some of their lower body work. So there's definitely value in it in this period if you don't have the ability to have access to heavy weights.
Cool. I think that's it for tonight, guys. But thank you so much for jumping on, especially on the Easter Monday public holiday. And thank you for everyone who tuned in to listen. If you do have any questions at all, you want to contact any of the presenters, I can always facilitate that as well. So just email me there at e.carney@valperformance.com. But everything will be, again, available on demand. And thank you again, guys, for jumping on.